So when explaining Invincible to someone who hasn't seen it yet, you almost always have to mention two things: superheroes and deaths. Because if you've ever seen the show, then you know there's a lot of superhero related death scenes. And in fact, in just the first 2 seasons alone, there's been over 7 billion deaths in total. That's right, 7 billion with a B, technically. Now, I don't expect many of you to remember them all. So with that thought in mind, and to celebrate the upcoming season 3, we're taking it upon ourselves to go through and explain every single death that has happened so far in the first 2 seasons of the show, as well as all the deaths seen in the special Adam Eve spin-off. And I mean every single death. From the random suicide of Rihanna to the shocking and kinda sad death of Maya, the old lady that Invincible did everything he possibly could to try and save. So with all that said, and without wasting any more of your time, let's begin with the very first death ever seen in the Invincible series. And it's the death of the random villain Biplane, who was a villain that after lining his suit with plutonium and threatening to blow both himself and the city up, was thrown into space by a mortal, where he soon died shortly after. Now following this, all the Guardians were soon called to the Guardians' cave, where they were then shockingly betrayed and killed by Omni-Man. Now Omni-Man did this by first attacking and crushing the skull of Red Rush, likely so he couldn't escape and report what has happened. Then of course skull smashing Darkwing before punching through the face of Green Ghost. He then used War Woman's mallet to smash the face of King Aquarius before simply ripping the brain apart from Martian Man. He then punched a hole straight through Immortal before twisting the head of War Woman completely around, finally ending all this off by completely decapitating Abe Lincoln. Now this of course, aside from being one of the craziest starts to any show ever, was only just the first 8 deaths that we'd of course see in the season that had so many more. And in fact, in the very next episode alone, we see the most amount of deaths that I think I've ever seen in any second episode of a show ever. That's 7 billion deaths to be exact. Now this episode brought us to war with the Flaxen Empire, when they invaded the city downtown. Now immediately, as you can see, we are presented with countless civilian deaths, and the death of an unnamed police officer who realistically is kind of a fucking idiot for even signing up for that job in a world like this one. Like, did he really think his life was going to end up any differently than him just simply being killed by some superhero incident? Like, really? What are we thinking here? Now, it gets stated much later in that episode that 338 civilian people were shot and killed in this attack. But alongside those humans who were killed also came quite a few Flaxen aliens as well, with Rexplode bombing a couple upon his entry into the fight. Now following this, Robot crushed the head of one of the aliens before telling Rex to help the mother and child, which also led to him bombing a few more Flaxen aliens before Adam Eve suffocated 2 more of her very own. Now as Invincible leaves to help the old lady, the tide of the war seems to shift once again, and Duplicate's clones are killed one after another. And honestly, if not for the time deterioration which killed 23 unnamed Flaxens in that moment, the entire team may have died right here right now, due to there just being way too many Flaxen aliens for them to handle. Now the time deterioration forced the Flaxens to retreat, but they would soon return once again 3 days later under new leadership and looking primarily to kill Invincible himself. Now the first to die in this fight is once again the clones of Duplicate, who get cut to pieces by an unknown but powerful laser created by the Flaxen Empire. Several more civilian people are then killed off by the Flaxens before 36 more aliens are disintegrated by Adam Eve herself. But then just as things were looking up, Adam Eve, Robot and Invincible are captured, which led to the deaths of many more Duplicate clones. But right then, as Eve was about to be killed, Invincible broke free and discovered that the key to defeating these aliens lied in their wristbands. So the team then set out to destroy the wristbands of all the aliens they could, which of course led to many more of them dying to the exposure to the time stream. The rest then of course retreated into the portal once again. But now sometime later, they would of course return for the final time, and immediately began killing many more civilian lives, disintegrating a woman and crushing a poor random man on their foot. Now almost immediately, it looked as though all hope was lost, and the Flaxens may actually finally win this war, when they were of course beating the team and almost killing Invincible himself. But then, right at that moment, Omni-Man arrived and started laying waste to every last one of the aliens around, forcing yet again another retreat. However, this time, they took an unwanted guest along with them, Omni-Man, who then grabbed hold of their leader and used him to smash through every building that was inside that universe. He then spent the remaining few hours of Earth time completely wiping the Flaxen Empire and the entire Flaxen race of 7 billion from existence, before then returning home to his wife and child like it was just another Tuesday at the office. Now of course this also marked the end of the episode, but in the very next episode we see the kaiju monster get beaten to death by Omni-Man himself, in what was a very close battle. Though it should also be noted that this monster does get taken away and revived by Cecil later on. So this death, like many that will come in the future, is technically questionable. Now next we get the death of an unnamed guard who gets his head caved in by one of the Mauler twins, when they of course set out to escape from the prison. Now upon escaping, Mauler Twin 1 decided to kick his clone into a laser, before using him as a human shield to make his escape. He did this because he knew that he could always just make another one if this one died. Again, just highlighting how one twin does not give a fuck about the other twin. But now the next death that is seen in the series actually comes from this random lizard that is stepped on by Sahim. Moments before, he reawakes Ka-Her, who actually kills Sahim off camera. Now later in that same episode, we also see 24 unnamed aliens also show up dead after being killed by the Sequids, again just like Sahim off camera. Now there's a couple of more questionable deaths in this episode, such as the Sequids attacking the Martians back on Mars, as well as Damien Darkblood being dragged back to hell at the end of the episode. But because it's never directly mentioned or no body is ever seen, it's hard to say for certain if either of these constitutes as a death or not. So let's just quickly mention them here and then move on. But now with that said, the next deaths are not only seen, but also some of the most gruesome in the entire show. It's of course the deaths of the gang members that fought against Titan. It began with 2 members being slammed through a wall, then continued with Titan throwing a crate at one of the gang members' heads. Then when the others brought out the big guns to take out Titan, this of course resulted in another of their gang members getting blown apart by a ricocheted bullet. He then throws a gun through the head of another before crushing one between 2 shelves. He then crushed the head of an idiot who pulled a knife on him by hitting him with a headbutt, then throwing that corpse at another of the gang members and crushing his chest, before then another of the gang members is killed by another ricocheted bullet that he shot at Titan at point blank range. Now this bloodbath finally ends off when Titan snaps the neck of the guy in charge. Like, do you see why I began by saying this is some of the most gruesome deaths in the whole show? My guy really didn't hold back in this moment. But now moving on, the next deaths we see are more of Duplicate's clones, when they are ripped in half and decapitated by Teeter Tyrant and his tentacles. We then see Black Samson get his head smashed against the floor and the walls by Battle Beast, before we soon see him do the same with Monster Girl. Now a little later we see more of Duplicate's clones finally achieve something, when she finally blows up Furnace. But now even this didn't change much, because soon after a couple more of her clones follow him in death after she is electrocuted by Kurtsk. But he is soon dealt with by Robot, so I guess in the end it did mean something. Maybe. But now quickly moving on, in the next episode we see the bodies of several unnamed people who were dissected by D.A. Sinclair. This of course happened off screen. We also see Doug Chesson getting his vocal cord sliced out with a scalpel, before then getting turned into Rihanna Man. Now you could say this is the death of Doug Cheston in this moment, or you could say he is still alive. But given what happens later in the episode, I don't think it matters all that much. Now later in the same episode, we also saw an unnamed doctor accidentally get thrown against the wall by Monster Girl, when they were of course trying to save her life. Now later, we see Rihanna Man, aka Doug, commit suicide after fighting with Invincible. He did this due to the realization of what he has now become. We then see several more failed subjects when Mark is fighting to save William, as well as Rick Sheridan and Mark both crushing the heads of the remaining Rihanna Man. Now in the following episode, we see Robot get disintegrated by his physical form. Though strictly speaking, Robot isn't actually alive, so again this is a questionable death. Next we see the OG physical form of Robot get euthanized by his clone out of mercy, which while being kinda sad, was easily one of the weirder deaths in the entire show. We then see Omni-Man absolutely destroy the soldiers that were waiting to ambush him in his house, first crushing one against the floor before impaling one with their own gun, then pushing and cutting one in half with the kitchen unit, then using his sheer speed to completely obliterate one into pieces, before kicking the remaining guard from his house, which inevitably led to them soon dying due to the many injuries that they now had. Donald Ferguson then commits suicide by blowing himself and Omni-Man up in the hopes of maybe slowing Omni-Man down. Then we see Omni-Man kill multiple Rihanna Man before entering a fight versus the kaiju monster that he killed before. Only this time he is aided by Invincible. And in fact it's Invincible himself who actually takes the big bastard out by electrocuting it. He does this while Omni-Man is fighting for his life versus Abraham Lincoln. But no matter how hard old Abe may have tried in that fight, he just wasn't strong enough to defeat Omni-Man. And in the end, Omni-Man once again decapitated him, making his moniker of the Immortal very much come into question once again. Now next, we enter into the final episode of Season 1, and it's an episode filled with shocking reveals and massive deaths, with the first deaths coming from a flashback that revealed the Filtrum Civil War, where we soon see several powerful Filtrumites killing each other to prove their strength. And in fact, we actually see in that moment a total of 183 unnamed Filtrumite soldiers killed by Conquest, Tula, Craig, as well as several more extremely strong Filtrumite leaders that we don't actually see. We also see a couple more blue aliens get killed by Nolan and 11 other Filtrumite soldiers off screen. We then see Omni-Man back in present time crush the skull of yet another unnamed male pilot, before hitting Mark so hard that he flies through the city killing dozens along his way. Then we see Mark try to save a young woman and her family from falling from a building, But that same building soon falls over and completely crushes the entire family. Omni-Man then grabs Invincible and uses him to kill another 150 unnamed people on board a moving train, as well as all those outside of it. He then took Invincible once again and used him to cause an avalanche that of course killed several more innocent people that were housed below. This of course marked the last deaths that actually came from this battle. But towards the end of the episode and the end of the season, we actually see 2 Martians get suffocated by the sea squids, as well as 2 unnamed weird looking aliens supposedly get killed by Battle Beast off screen. Now this of course, like I just said, marks the last of season 1's 7 billion deaths. But come Adam Eve, the Invincible spin-off, we got a hell of a lot more, with the first death being Adam Eve's own mother, Polly, who died due to some unspecified causes while giving birth to Adam Eve. Though as you'll soon see coming up in this video, this death is again questionable. Now Eve's other parents also at this same time lost their own child due to some unknown issues surrounding the birth. But that death was never actually seen on screen and was only mentioned briefly before Eve took the baby's place. Now later, after she becomes the hero, Adam Eve, she goes up against a group of mutated supervillains that are also kinda like her siblings. She throws and kills Phase 5, the youngest and weakest of the siblings, against a car, before then blasting Phase 4 with a supercharged attack that was brought about by her frustration. She is then aided by Dr. Elias when he rolls over both Phase 3 and Phase 2, killing Phase 3. Phase 2, however, dies shortly after by completely disintegrating due to either being out of his test tube for too long or by wasting away because he has no energy left after fighting Eve. It's kinda unclear which it might have been, so you decide. Now later, when Eve and Dr. Elias are kidnapped, it's revealed that Polly, Eve's biological mother, is actually still alive, but is now part of some weird life support test tube. But now even despite this big reveal, she is then soon accidentally shot and killed by a stray bullet that is shot from the gun of Erickson when he was fighting with Dr. Elias for the gun. Following this, it's then revealed that Dr. Elias was actually shot by that same gun off screen when they were of course still fighting for that same gun. Now this death, while being extremely sad for Adam Eve, actually marks the last death seen in this spin-off. But fear not, because come the official 2nd season of the Invincible series, we of course got a hell of a lot more, with some honestly being more gruesome than any we previously mentioned in this video. So without wasting any more time, let's begin with the first death seen in that 2nd season. The death of the widely questionably named Immortal, from Earth 646. He died during his fight versus that Earth's Invincible and Omni-Man, when Omni-Man severed his head from his body. Next we see 2 unnamed men laying on the floor of the city after Invincible and Omni-Man destroyed it. It's unclear exactly how they died, but they are seen, so it has to be mentioned. Next we see several more people instantly die when Omni-Man and Invincible crash through the ceiling of the underground base. We then see Omni-Man destroy Robot before killing many others by attacking Robot's physical self. He then straight up kills that physical self after laying down one of the funniest and coldest lines I think I've ever heard in any show.
Someday, you too will die.
Sure. But you should have died at birth.
Now after ending their raid on the Resistance base, we see Mark about to kill the remaining members, but we never actually see him do so, but we know he probably did. So let's just mention it here and move the hell on. Next we have a fight where another of Duplicate's clones gets crushed by falling debris that came from a building. And later it's revealed during the team's report that another unnamed civilian died in pretty much the same way, during the same exact fight by some more falling debris. Now following this, the next set of deaths actually all come at the same time, when Angstrom Levy removed his helmet, which of course caused an explosion that killed 12 alternate versions of the Mauler twins, as well as around 1,000 versions of himself, marking the most mass deaths seen in a single moment in this season, as well as the final death seen in that first episode. Now the next deaths come in the very next episode and begin with the body reveals of 2 guys Darkwing tied up in episode 1 of season 1. They died because he of course couldn't come back and free them or get them down, due to Omni-Man of course killing him back at the beginning of the show. Next we see the snapped neck and dead body of another unnamed man who apparently was killed off screen by Nightboy, the apprentice of Darkwing. Following this and later in the episode, we see 5 unnamed Atlanteans get cut in half after being crushed by Depth Dweller, after it was accidentally released by Cecil and his missiles. Later, we then see several more unnamed Martians die after being stabbed by Russ Livingston. This of course happened off screen, but the bodies are indeed shown. Later, towards the end of the episode, we see the Supreme Lizard get shot and killed by the King Lizard. This was so he could finally solidify himself as the true ruler of the Lizard Army. Following this, in the next episode, we actually see a backstory and reveal of what happened to the Enopians race and people. And let's just say it wasn't anything good. We see countless bodies laying dead on the ground after being killed by Filtramites off screen. But that's not all, as the ones who tried to rebel and fight back were dealt with worst of all, resulting in at least 20 Enopians being ripped apart and shown dead. Later in the same episode, we see the death of 2 unknown aliens that were ripped apart by the mighty Alan the Alien. The first is seen on this monitor, and the second is this giant ugly thing that is strangled to death by Alan's bare hands. Following this is a set of deaths that I'm not 100% sure actually counts as deaths, but I said fuck it, we'll add it in. It's the deaths of the Kanzalok aliens that Alan of course eats. Again, I'm not sure if this constitutes a death that's worthy of explaining, but whatever, it's here, so let's mention it. Now after this meal is complete, Alan gets ripped from the ship and beaten to death by Tula, Lucan, and another unnamed Filtramite. Though it should be mentioned that technically Alan doesn't actually stay dead after this fight and does actually come back a little later. So again, like many of the deaths we've mentioned so far, it's debatable whether it constitutes as a confirmed death or not. But now in the next episode, after the Filtramite invade Traxon, we see Omni-Man kill Lucan by sticking him through the stomach with a giant piece of rock, though he doesn't actually appear fully dead until the end of the episode. Omni-Man then returns outside, where we see countless Traxian dead bodies laying dead on the ground. We then see Omni-Man and Mark enter a fight to the death with the remaining 2 Filtramite invaders. We then see Omni-Man, after an incredible back and forth fight against the 2, actually be the one to end up killing them both. First by smashing the head of one of them before pulling on Tula's hair and ripping apart her jaw. But now due to the weird regenerative technology that actually exists in this show, these deaths, again, like many we have mentioned, are questionable and they could actually return in the future for all we know. But now moving on, and towards the end of the episode, we see that the Mauler Twin clone has poisoned and killed the Mauler Twin original. This was simply because he was sick of following that twin's orders. We then see Iguana in the next episode stab one of the unnamed guards through the chest before slicing through the neck of the other one, leaving them both dead on the floor. Next we see when Team B of the Guardians comes to fight the Lizard League that a few of Duplicate's clones once again end up dead, as well as one of them just getting ripped in half. We then see several more get crushed and smashed by Komodo Dragon, who in fact pretty much killed so many in that moment that honestly even I was shocked. Even eventually actually killing the original, or what we believed at that moment to be the original. Which, credit where it's due, is something that no other villain has even come close to doing. Next we see Shrinking Ray shrink down and climb inside Salamander, where she does something to his brain that ultimately results in him dying. She then gets eaten by Komodo Dragon and tries to regrow to normal size while inside of him. But for some unknown and unexplained reason, this monster was not only able to withstand this process, but also somehow was able to subdue her within his own body. I know, I thought the same exact thing as you. What the actual fuck is going on in this show? Sometimes it just gets so out of hand that even I can't comprehend what is actually happening with inside of it. But now next we see Rex slice through Iguana with his powers before having his hand eaten by Komodo Dragon. But luckily for him, he was actually holding a coin that was infused with his powers beforehand, so Komodo Dragon just ate his way to an early grave. In the beginning of the next episode, we see Rex get shot in the back of the head by King Lizard. But this shockingly doesn't actually kill him, and in fact just really pissed him off to the point that he beat the shit out of King Lizard and stomped his brains into the ground. Later in this same episode, Mark is going through his dad's novels, and in one of them we discover the Space Rider and his Infinity Ray, which he then used to kill a number of unnamed and unimportant aliens. Following this, and in another of his dad's novels, we see an unnamed female Filtramite get her head ripped off by some beast-like alien also known as a Ragnar. Now much later, at the end of this episode, we see a realm of the Walking Dead, when Angstrom Levy is travelling through realities in order to return to his own. It's brief, and it does kinda come up again later, but for now, this is just a little mention of it. Next, we see Rex back in action when he uses his new and improved arm to blast a giant squid monster. Now it's unclear and never directly stated if this actually killed the beast or not, but just in case it did, let's just add it to the list. Following this, we see Monster Girl kill, or I guess destroy, one of the expensive robots that belongs to Rudy, when she was of course using Rudy's training sim. Later we see Donald Ferguson doing one of the healthiest things you could possibly do when he watches past versions of himself dying. We see the first version of himself dying to some alien squid that crushes him into the ground, and the second version of himself dying after running back into an explosion. There's also a hell of a lot more files seen here, but they're never actually fully shown to us, so we don't actually know how many times this poor bastard has probably died. But I'm guessing it's been a lot. Later we see another kaiju monster appear in the ocean and crush many civilians on board a cruise vessel, before causing a leak in the ship that kills a couple of more people. We then see Anissa fly through the head of the beast, killing it like it was nothing more than a bug at the end of her shoe. Next, in the final episode of the series, we see Nolan destroying a number of guard robots before killing 4 of the unidentified space aliens that were sent to stop him from escaping the prison. We then see later in the episode an alternate reality Invincible grab and kill the son of Angstrom Levy. This of course happens off screen, but it doesn't leave much to the imagination. We then see another reality where Invincible crashed into the ground and killed dozens of innocents, as well as Angstrom Levy's own wife. Another reality shows Angstrom Levy as a police detective shooting at an Invincible who has just killed several more civilians. This Invincible then simply flies through 2 of the officers and grabs and crushes the head of the 3rd. Another reality then shows Invincible removing the heads of several people that he has captured. We are then brought back to Armark, who is now currently flying through many different realities. And in one, he finds himself in an Earth that has been taken over by zombies. And in this Walking Dead reality, we can clearly see countless dead men and women walking around. There really isn't much to be said about this reality, of course, but there is quite a few dead people within it, so it has to be mentioned even if it is just briefly. Now later, after fighting Angstrom Levy across countless dimensions and realities, Mark finally lets loose and completely obliterates him into nothing. Never once stopping even for a moment to realize that by killing him, you are killing any hope you have of getting home. That is of course until the Guardians from the future tracked him down and helped him return home. But now with that marks the end and the last death that is actually seen so far in the Invincible series. But I'm sure and almost 100% positive that many more awaits us in the upcoming season 3. And who knows, if this video does well and people want to see it, I'll make another video covering all the deaths that we of course get in that season 3. So again, like always, like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you want to see that video in the future. But now with all that said, that's going to do it for me and this one. I hope you all have a great day or night wherever you are, and peace.